So hello, I'm Sanchita Chowdhury. I'm one of the senior educational psychologists with the Educational Psychology Service in Haringey. And I will be talking a little bit about supporting children and young people to go back to school and how we can support that within the home. So in terms of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to do a very brief summary of the previous presentation, just to cover some of the topics that were discussed so that you can go back and look at the parts that you find interesting or would like more information about. We're going to be talking about the new normal, what that looks like for children, and how to share conversations about the new normal with children. And then we're going to be talking about some tips about how to talk about change, how to reintroduce an appropriate routine, and what to do if your child is feeling a little bit reluctant to go back to school as well. So just to start, so there was a previous presentation, as Michelle was just talking about, by Karen Hodes, and these slides will be available afterwards, so the links are there for you to go and look up some of the materials that we've been talking about and the videos that Karen has put up. And things that she discussed were about managing sleep, understanding children's anxiety, anxiety and the relationship with emotions, and regulating emotions as well. And I know Siobhan later is going to be talking a lot more about the anxiety and the relationship with emotions as well. But just to say that both Siobhan and I have created these presentations, and we hope that they're very helpful to the majority of you. But of course, they might not be so specific, as there's a variety of ages and there might be a variety of needs within the group of parents that are watching today. But please do use the chat function to send us any questions if you feel, you know, I'd like to use this strategy with my child, but I'm not quite sure how to tweak it so it's appropriate for them. Do ask us, or you can ask us later as well. So please do let us know if there's anything that we can support with. So just starting with talking about the new normal, which unfortunately isn't going to stop evolving or changing. It is a continuous process, and it's very different between different schools as well. But there is sort of a consistent approach from in the questions and the types of queries that parents have been coming to us with. And they're questions like, will I see my friends, and where will I have lunch, and where will I sit, and how will I catch up on learning that I've missed? And I guess in this forum now, we won't be able to answer all of those questions because they are so specific to different schools and the way in which they will be disseminating their information, and also how they're going to structure their days and things like that as well, because it will be dependent on the staff that are in, on the space that they have and things like that. But rest assured, they are definitely working on this. And obviously there's going to be a couple of teacher training days for probably all schools right at the beginning of September, where they'll be talking about these sorts of things and really ironing out anything that they want to clarify between all the staff when they're all together, so that when they send out information to families, they feel very secure and happy with what they're sending out. So if you haven't heard from your schools yet, please try not to be worried, but it will be coming as soon as it's ready for them to be able to share it with you. But I understand that that is going to create some anxiety. And I think that goes to my last point there at the bottom, about with children, we want to listen and acknowledge, note down and seek clarification where we can, but the listening and the acknowledging part is what we really want to encourage with children and young people, that we are listening and we acknowledge that it's difficult and that it's challenging, but we will do what we can and we will find the answers to things that we can. And if we don't know, we'll try and find out for you. So it's just that process of having dialogue with our children and young people. And also trying to focus on what we do know. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So in terms of talking about change, it's obviously going to be very different depending on the age of the children that you have at home and your families, and how you already discuss and talk to each other about things. And what they're able to understand. So I've put at the bottom of the slide there that using stories and cartoons and familiar characters might work much better for younger children, but for older children and young people, it might be more about the conversations that you have and the way in which you engage with them, which again I'll talk about a little bit later. But I think the important part about talking about change is talking about times that they've experienced change before and how they've mastered it. So keeping the narrative positive, keeping the discussions as positive as you can. So when have you experienced this and done something quite well with that? So changing from year group to year group is a really common one, because there is a new classroom, there is a new teacher, but how did you feel when just before that was going to happen, that change was going to happen, and how did you feel afterwards? And isn't it great? Do you still feel that way now? No, because we've moved on and you did really well with that. And also talking about other changes they might have experienced, so a change of school or a change of home, they might have moved house, and it might be that you ask them, you know, can you think of any times that you've had a change, and then you can think about that together, and that will really help the conversation flow a little bit more, so it feels less about trying to talk about how we're going to make it better and more about just having a discussion. I've put on my next point, try not to tell them that you know how you feel, how they feel, because I think that's quite common, quite easy to do. I know how you feel about that. But sometimes it's very difficult to know how another person feels, because there's so many different factors that contribute to that feeling that they're having for that particular person. But you can definitely model using your own experiences and acknowledge that it's really challenging. So it sounds like you're feeling really worried. I felt worried when I had to go back to work and I had butterflies in my tummy. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how it was going to look. But actually, once I had a look around and I talked to a few of my colleagues, I knew what it was going to be like, and I felt a lot better. So you can still model and use the language, but without saying that you know how they feel. And as I mentioned before, using stories or cartoons, and I've put 2 books there. The top one, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's about separation, and the second one is about moving into a new school year, both aimed at younger children, but both really lovely books as well, and I've got them both and I use them quite a lot with my children. Sorry, just getting used to this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about motivating children to go back to school. I guess in the ideal world, our children will go off skipping, and they'll be really happy and they'll have a great day, and we'll feel really happy that they've gone back and they feel secure and happy to go back. Unfortunately, the reality is a few children might find that a little bit more difficult, and it's about how do we support them to go back and the styles in which we can support them to go back. And I know Siobhan's going to be talking a little bit about parenting styles and things a bit later, which will be really helpful as well. So just talking about motivation theory, so there's 2 types of, the model says that there's external motivation, which is the smiley face on the left, and then intrinsic motivation, where you've got the smiley face but with the purple ring inside. So what external motivations are things like tangible rewards, so things like sticker charts and money sometimes, and sweets, and all sorts of other rewards that we give to our children to motivate them to do something that we'd like them to do, or behaviour we'd like to see more of. So those are the times that we might use those rewards. Now the research says that whilst they're very, very helpful at particular times, what happens is if when you take away the reward, the behaviour is not likely to continue, because it's dependent on getting the reward. So although I wholeheartedly support rewards, they're more useful in very particular small things that you're trying to target, for example, toilet training and things like that. Whereas what we want children to move on to is intrinsic motivation, which is when they do things because they want to do things, and that makes them carry on doing that thing without you having to say anything much at all, which will happen for different areas of their learning and their development in different ways. But I'm going to talk about particularly about going back to school for a little bit. But the benefits of having intrinsically motivated children means that they're more likely to engage in lifelong learning because they want to learn. They feel more satisfied with their accomplishments, and they have positive attributional styles. So attributions are a way in which you think about things. So having a positive thinking or attribution style is when you, for example, you might, for a positive style, you might say, oh, I'm not doing very well at this. It's because I've missed a lot of school. Whereas a negative attribution style might be, I'm not doing very well at this because I'm feeling a bit stupid and I think I'm not good at it. So you're attributing it to something internal rather than saying it's because of a reason that is more positive, because you can actually do something about that reason. Whereas if you attribute it to something inside you, you're less likely to want to, you're less likely to be able to change that. Intrinsically motivated children are also more creative. They have better recall or memory. They're more flexible in how they solve problems, and more and better at relating different concepts together. So that's to do with problem solving as well. And that does lead to higher self-esteem and higher feelings of self-worth, which you will see within your child because they will feel, look and seem highly motivated. I think it's important to say as well with intrinsically motivated children that they'll show a much more excitement about doing things as well, which will help you feel better about what they're doing, because you'll see that they're feeling excited about that. So how can we try to encourage that? Well, firstly, I think we need to acknowledge the impact of our own anxiety and about the unknown, about what's happening, and the fact that it filters down to our children. And we're all very aware of the fact that your child may run up to you and say, oh, what does this mean? And that's because they've heard you in a phone call or when you're talking to a friend or something, because they are little sponges and they are listening and they are picking up on all the ways in which you show your anxiety, and they are picking up on that. But I think it's important to say, we're not saying that you shouldn't show your anxiety, because of course everybody feels anxious and people feel worried. It's about how we respond to that. So, for example, if you are feeling anxious, naming that anxiety and saying that you're feeling anxious, well, what are we going to do about it? Well, you know what, I think I need to do a little bit of relaxation, or I might do a bit of yoga, and maybe that will make me feel better. And actually, yes, now I do feel better. So going through those steps and naming it and talking about it will help your child understand that there is a way to get through it. We need to increase our children's feelings of competency, so how well they do things, and that we do through praise, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And that's one of the biggest ways of increasing motivation, is what teachers do in schools all the time. So praising children so that they can see what hard work does for them. And also feelings of control and thinking about what we can control. So yes, there will be a lot of anxiety about and questions about what's going to happen, but what can we control and what do we know about? So we do know that you're going to be wearing a uniform, or we do know you're going to have school dinners and that you need to prepare for that in that way. So have those discussions and think about the things that you do know already. For young people, so for older children, it might be talking a little bit more about the future and aspirations, and just revisiting the language of talking about talking about what they would like for their future. The next point is a little bit difficult for some people, because obviously the lockdown has been very different for different families, but encouraging some element of reading or writing or drawing without the pressure. So shopping lists, or writing a card to someone and colouring a picture in. And these are providing opportunities for you to be able to praise, and they're achievable tasks. So they're things that you know they're going to be able to do, or that you might not need help with, but you can have that opportunity to praise them. Connecting with other children if possible as well, so play date in a park while you can socially distance, or maybe a Zoom call, things that you've already been doing probably over the lockdown, but you might then change the focus of what you're discussing or what they're going to be talking about to, oh, what sort of games might we be able to play in the playground, you know, can we still play duck duck goose if it's younger children, you know, things like that. Or yes, sending a card or an email, and just ways to stay connected to other people. And we know that for secondary age pupils in particular, the peer group is you're more likely to listen to your peer group than you are to your own family sometimes. So having that opportunity and encouraging young people to sort of say, oh, have you been thinking about going back to school, in any way that they would like to? So it might not be the same language as you, but that will be helpful too. And my last point on here is about staying connected. So how will you stay connected to them, and how have you been staying connected to them? For some families, that's discussions over meal times about, you know, how was your day, any bits that were exciting, any bits that were a bit more challenging. or it might be for older people sending them a text, or you know, having a conversation over WhatsApp about how things are going. But the most important thing is acknowledging that you're there and that you're available, and that you're interested in their feelings and any anxieties that they have. You might not be able to fix things, but you are there to listen, and you are there and you're open to having those discussions whenever they need that, because it might not be now, it might be sometime in the future, in a few months' time, that is something that you want to talk about. So I've also just talked about using praise. So there's a little handout there at the side that you can get if you Google 100 ways to praise. But the important thing about praising is focusing on effort rather than the outcome. So rather than what they've achieved, it's how hard that they've tried. And praise is most meaningful when it's genuine, it's very specific, it's spontaneous, and when it's well deserved. So I love the way you use those colours. You're really good at making me laugh, or you've been working so hard on that. So you're acknowledging exactly what they're doing and just showing that you have noticed that. Now, I feel like I've missed a slide somewhere, so apologies if I just go back. Yeah, I think I missed talking a little bit about having a routine for the day. So I've put this right at the beginning because it's quite helpful for setting the scene for children and young people in terms of the discourse and the discussions that you're going to be having about your day. But the summer and the lockdown has been, again, very difficult and different for different families, and it's important to acknowledge that it might not have had much structure, but for some families it was essential that there was structure because of the needs within the family. But it is important to have structure for children and young people because it provides them with the feeling of knowing what's coming next, which makes them feel safe. So that's why schools are very structured, and they are going back into that forum. So we want to try, however possible, to get some level of structure within the day. And that might be just through the language that you're using. So what are we going to do this morning, and what are we going to do this afternoon? Or what am I doing now? What am I going to do later? And just beginning to build in that sort of structure. For younger children, a visual timetable can be really helpful. So I've put one together in the corner there. But it doesn't need to be so formal. You can just put it on a scrap of paper, or you can do it together with your child or your young person and draw it up yourself and decorate it yourselves, things like that. But it might just be as simple as we're going shopping, and then we're going to have lunch, and in the afternoon we're going to the park, and then we're going to have dinner. But you might sometimes not know what you're doing in the afternoon or have a plan for that. So you can use a question mark symbol, and you can say, well, after lunch we'll have a think about what we can do because it might rain later, so we're not sure whether we're going to be able to go to the park. So let's just put question mark and we'll fill that in. That's still providing that structure because they know that it's not known and that they're going to be going on to doing something else after that as well. I hope that's clear. I'll just go through to the end. So I put some resources here. So the first one is a website, which I know it says toddlers in the line there, but actually the website is very good at talking about praise and how to make it effective as possible, and it can definitely be edited for using with older children and young people, definitely. And I also wanted to highlight the Incredible Years website. So within Haringey, between CAMS and the Educational Psychology Service, we run an Incredible Years programme every term. This term it will be myself running it, and we'll be trying to do this online this term. But if there was, and it's a parenting programme there to support parents to through supporting your children's behaviour. And that's what the focus is on, and bringing parents together to discuss and share ideas in a more sort of structured environment. And if it's something that you're interested in, and you please do ask if you're known to CAMS, then your CAMS practitioner, or you can go to your school and ask your school SENCO, and they can give you more information and leaflets about it as well. And then, as Michelle said, we've created lots of different leaflets and things over this time, and they're available on our local offer. So please do have a look at the website for some leaflets. There's ones on teenage sleep, there's ones on managing anxiety, there's ones on autism and sleep as well. So please do take a look. And if you do have any questions, please do use the chat function or send us an email. but I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, so I'm going to continue talking to you today about how to support your child's return to school. And the aims of the session are, so I'm going to speak briefly just about our responses to stress, and then explain to you a hand model of the brain. I will introduce emotion coaching, which is a communication technique which I'm hoping that you'll be able to take away and use. I'm then going to offer some top tips and how to prepare for this transition back into school, and then finally finish with some ideas on how to take care of yourselves and look after yourselves during this time. So our response to stress: when we're faced with a stressful situation, our brains respond with a fight, flight or freeze type of behaviour. Now, we do this instinctively, and it's a good thing because it's our brain's way of keeping us safe. However, we do know that sometimes our stress response may not be proportionate to the stressor. And so some of these responses that we can have will include a fast heart rate, an increase in breathing, maybe a loss of appetite or irritability. And you may find that your child complains of tummy aches or headaches. They may act out more, or they may display some fearful reactions. And so we can really experience quite powerful responses to stress. So yeah, the powerful reactions, they can be really difficult to pull back from. And that, I think, relates to us as adults also. So one way that you can relate to this is if you think about if you've ever found yourself in a bad mood and you're really not quite sure why or where it came from, and it's just really difficult to shake it off. So as adults, we can find it difficult to explain and sometimes understand why we feel this way. So imagine thinking about our children, how difficult it is for them to not only understand, but to have to sometimes explain when they're asked, why did you do this? Or why are you crying? Or why are you feeling this way? So really recognizing the powerful responses and how difficult they can be to make sense of them. So how the brain responds to stress. Now, if we begin to understand what's happening in our bodies and our brain, it can help us take a step back to understand about where our emotions are coming from. And then as a result, we can feel more in control. So I think this is a really useful model, and I've used it with children, and they've actually recited it back to me and pinpointing when they've flipped their lid or when they knew they were going to flip their lid, and then also how they've replaced their lid. So I'm going to use my hand here, so I hope you can all see me. So we take our hands and we place our thumb across our palm, and this represents our downstairs brain. So thinking about our spinal cord and then our brainstem and our limbic system. So here is where our emotions and our memories are processed. And it's also where the fight, flight or freeze type response is triggered, which I spoke about. Now, up here we have our fingers, and this represents our downstairs or upstairs brain. So if we place this across, this creates our model of the brain. And here, our cortex, this is our rational part of the brain. And that houses our ability to think, to reason, and to problem solve. Now, when something triggers us and our emotions build up, we can flip our lid. So almost like a pot boiling over, it becomes too much, and we flip our lids. So some behaviors that you might see when this happens include shouting or crying or lashing out or maybe running away. So our rational, logical brain is being overwhelmed by our emotions, and that makes it really hard to think clearly. So you can see here that when our lid is flipped, the distance is much greater between our downstairs and our upstairs brain. So these two are really struggling to talk to one another. So take a moment and think about your own children and perhaps about yourselves. How would you know if your child has flipped their lid? So what are you hearing? What kind of things are you seeing? So do you find yourself in a battle, going back and forth in argument? Or is your child's response more related to flight? So is their instinct to run away? And do you find yourself chasing them around? Or do you find yourself asking, are you even listening to me? So does your child switch off or disengage, perhaps related to a freeze response? And then what sort of things might help to soothe them when they're feeling this way? So it's really important to be aware of your child's response and of our own, because then we can begin to think about how we can support our child at that moment. So there are many ways to soothe our children. So some breathing techniques or nurturing, maybe some mindfulness. But another way that we can help our children, so replace their lid, meaning we help this upstairs brain communicate with our downstairs brain, is through a communication technique which we called emotion coaching. Okay, so what is emotion coaching? So it's based on research by John Gottman, and to put it simply, it's helping our children and young people understand the different emotions that they experience, so why they occur, and then how to handle them. So why do we emotion coach? Does it work? Well, research demonstrates that it helps children to regulate, improve, and take ownership of their behaviour. It helps children to calm down, which is often what we're seeking in those moments. It creates a more consistent response to children's behaviour, which is really important. And then it helps parents and carers to feel more in control. So when we take a step back from what's being said and the behaviour that we're seeing, we can put ourselves in a different position, and then we try to name the emotion. So as we begin to see feelings rather than the outward expression, it can help us then feel more in control of the situation. And then this leads to positive relationships, which is really what we're seeking when we're talking to our children and young people. Okay, so emotion coaching in action. So I'm going to take you through these steps and I'll relate them to some statements, but I'm hoping it will make more sense when I give you an example later on. So step one, recognize and empathize. So what are you seeing? What kind of things are you hearing? So it might be to say, oh, I can see that you're really upset right now. Validate and label the feeling. Wow, you are angry. And then validate it. So as Sanjita spoke earlier on, so, you know, recognize, I would feel angry too if that happened to me. Then step three, setting limits. So we want to use here clear, concise language around setting boundaries. So it can be as simple as, we don't hit, or maybe your toys are not for throwing. Step four then is to problem solve with your child. How can I help you? So let's think together about how we can make you feel okay again. Okay, so these are 4 different styles of communicating, which I'll introduce, and will hopefully make more sense again when I talk you through examples. So the different styles of emotions, we can have emotion dismissing, emotion disapproving, then a laissez-faire or more permissive response, and then emotion coaching. So let's take this example. So I'm guessing perhaps maybe this might be something that you hear over the next coming weeks. I can't go back to school. I'm too worried. So how are we going to respond? So taking first our dismissive response. Now, as I read through these responses, you might recognize some of them as your own style, or you might recognize them as styles that you've heard before, or people that you know that use these responses. So just keep them in mind. Our dismissive response then. So don't be silly. You'll be fine. Everyone's going back. It's not a big deal. So this kind of response really aims to to minimize the problem or the concern. So, and I do believe this is coming from a good place. So we're trying to really soothe the child and help them feel better. But in doing that, sometimes we're moving on maybe a little bit too quickly and maybe trying to rescue them. Don't be silly, it's okay, and let's just get on with it. Next, then, is our disapproving response. Well, yes, you are, and that's it. Or, you know, you've got no choice, and that's it, no control. And this kind of response is sometimes an attempt to rid of maybe perhaps more negative emotions, and it uses more discipline or a punishment style, but it also sometimes gives us a false sense of control, and we feel kind of stuck a little bit and respond point blankly that this is what's going to happen. Our more permissive response then is to think, oh my goodness, you poor thing, you're right, this really is worrying. And so this response again, so it freely accepts emotional expression, which is good to respond to the feeling, but it doesn't always offer children or us the chance to model or to help our children problem solve. So let's look at the emotion coach response. So in this example, I've included step 1 and 2 together because I think if this is a technique that you can take away and use, you'll find that naturally step 1 and 2 come together for you. So empathize and validate. I can see that you're feeling worried about going back to school. I can really hear that you're worried about this, and I understand. So it's been a really long time. And then maybe, as Sanjita referred to earlier on, saying, I felt a little bit nervous, or I had butterflies, you know, when I was going back to work. Step 3 then, I have said, so for the limits, to choose if appropriate, because I think sometimes we need to use our own judgment in helping our children. And it might be at this time just about recognizing the feeling or the emotion that your child is communicating to you. So taking those step 1 and 2, and sometimes that's just enough. But then later on, maybe if you have the opportunity or it comes up again and your child and you are feeling a bit calmer, it might be time to set the limit and the reality of going back to school. So stating really clearly, your school's going to open again on this date, or it's time to get back to school again. And then step 4, which is really important, so problem solve together. Let's think together. So I can help you feel less worried. And then say, you can do this. So what we're saying to our children here at this point is that I'm here with you, and also that you are strong enough. So this is where we need to believe in our children and believe that they can do this, because they will feel that and then we hope believe in themselves. So a little bit now on school refusal. I think the example I used was perhaps a little easier because the emotion was named. So it was named that the child is feeling worried about school. However, you might find yourself in a situation in the next coming weeks where you're hearing point blank statements. So I'm just not going back to school, or I really, really don't want to go. And in these cases, we need to be a little bit more of what we call an emotion detective. So I would say to you that you know your children. So take a step back and really think about what are the possible feelings or emotions. So not only what they're saying or how they're behaving, but why might they not want to go back? So what's happening for them? Are they scared? Are they worried? And really try and name the emotion with the child, or help them to figure out. So you might use some statements, some I wonder statements, and try to figure it out together. And in this way, you can support them in recognizing what's behind the resistance or the reluctance to go back. Now, there may be times for some of you or people that you know that children will show maybe higher levels of distress, or they may be really panicked about school. And in these cases, I would say it's really important to communicate with your school. So create a joint approach. So let the school know how your child is feeling. And then hopefully you can come together to create some coping strategies, which will then support them with this return. So I've said begin the conversation now. So let's not wait until the week before school or a few days before. Let's really think about this now and take small steps. So do the school run. Take a walk by school and notice. So you can notice what's the same. What did you see before that's still here? Or maybe some things are different. What's there now that wasn't there before? And just familiarize yourself with getting back into that daily routine. Sanjita spoke a lot about praise. So praise our children when they try to do things independently. So really boost that self-esteem and confidence. Talk to me about my favourite things at school. So really positive language. School is a positive thing. You know, what are you looking forward to? Talk to me about my friends at school. So it might be opportunities where you can begin to think about meeting up with friends, or we're all familiar, I think, with Zoom sessions. And if not, if it's not possible, begin to think about what friends are you looking forward to seeing? What do you like about your friends at school? Then an idea of creating maybe a lockdown diary. So this can be a book that you can have pictures or images or some drawings or maybe some memories of things that you've done while in lockdown or over the summer holidays. And this can be something that you keep together as a family as a memory, or it can be something that you share with friends or with school. And then be informed. So take a look at your school website or social media and keep updated with what's happening. So how can parents, carers support? And some of these ideas I hope will help to alleviate maybe your own worries or some anxieties that you might have. So perhaps asking for photographs. So if you've got younger children, any changes to the classroom or the school. Find out about what the changes look like, and this is across all age groups. So when you feel more informed, you'll be more confident to then explain to your children what those changes are and how the school might look. Again, sharing some fun things you've learned together with key members of staff. Talk to your child about settling in. So have their interests changed, or how are they feeling? How have they managed? So communication is really important here. And then, so share games that you have played during lockdown or over the summer term, and then to support the continuity during transition. And what I mean here is you possibly have had a lot of time at home with our children. So it's really important to not just stop all of those things that you were doing. So there may be some games or some rituals or some routines that you've really taken on board. So don't just stop those when schools return. So try to take a little bit of them with you so that it's familiar to your child, and it will help ease with the transition back. And then really important, so follow your child's leads during this transition and respond to their emotions as they happen. So you might think that your child is going to be so overwhelmed or really tearful or worried, and they might go off to school on that morning feeling absolutely fine. Or otherwise, sometimes you may be surprised by some of the worries that your child is experiencing, and you weren't really expecting them. But what I say what I mean when I say follow your child's lead is really about trusting in yourselves as parents, that you can help, that you can support the emotions which come. Okay, so I've spoken quite a bit about verbal communication, and I just wanted to put in some additional tips, because for some children with additional needs, they can find verbal communication a little bit more difficult. So what we can use in those cases are more visuals. So maybe some image cards or a visual timetable, some social stories or emotion cards. So if your child or young person finds it difficult to explain or name what their emotion is, they might find it a little bit easier to maybe use a flashcard or an image card which relates to how they're feeling. A language script then is thinking about a shared language about the school return, and this is something that all the adults around the child or young person will use. So they're hearing the same thing. And then again, communicating to class teachers. So are there any changes which have happened? Are there any updates that you can give on needs, likes or dislikes? And are any of these likely to impact the transition back? So if your child is really struggling, what can help? So think about allowing them to take something from home which is special to them. So something small that they can put into their pocket or school bag, and they can be reminded of this while they're at school. It might be something like a soft toy or a favourite toy that you can place somewhere in the house which they know will be waiting for them when they get back. Younger children might benefit from something a bit more visual or sensory, so maybe some perfume on a piece of clothing. And then thinking about our older children, they might appreciate some messages of encouragement. So these can be hidden in their belongings, or if they can have phones, maybe some text messages throughout the day just to check in and see how they're doing. But given time, any anxiety or worries will hopefully ease once they've become adjusted to the school environment again. I think the key message here is really give yourselves time and give your children and young people time, because it is a huge transition, and yeah, just give yourselves time. Okay, so be aware of your own emotions, and so be aware of the language that you're using, be aware of how you're making reference to school, be aware of your body language. So are you rushing around doing other things, or are you able to sit down and really focus on this conversation? And then also, really important, be aware of how you speak to other adults when you think that your children might not be listening. And think about yourself. So you can relate this even to our hand model of our brain, which I explained. How do you know when you're feeling anxious? And then would your child recognize if you were feeling anxious? So what would they see? What types of behavior would they see from you? What would they hear? Children learn from your example more than advice. So show them the behavior that you want to encourage. Okay, so then some strategies to self-soothe. So if you do have concerns about the school return, get as much information as you need from your school about your specific school's return. So if you have a clear understanding of what the return will look like, as I said, then you're better able to communicate this to your child. And if you feel safe, then you will help them to feel safe too. But if you do have some worries, try talking to somebody that you trust, so share them. Maybe spend some time in nature, so get some fresh air or go for a walk. Getting enough sleep is really important, so we know that we can tolerate a lot more when we feel rested. So adjusting back into routines, and especially sleep routines. You might like to listen to some uplifting music or watch a movie. Really focus on the positive. This is a good thing. And yeah, importantly, be kind to yourselves. And then just to finish, I've included some resources. So Sophie's stories are therapeutic stories, and they're available online, and she talks about being a back to school superhero. So it's more for our primary age children. For adolescents, then Young Minds have a really good website about returning to school. I referred to earlier social stories, and the autism.org website has got really good strategies and examples of those. And for those of you that would like to learn more, or just go back over what I've talked about today regarding emotion coaching, the Emotion Coaching UK website has got lots of resources and information. And I've included a YouTube link, which goes over the hand model of the brain again, but it's really targeted towards children, and it's a really accessible video with really good examples that they would relate to. And that is it from me. So I hope that there's something that you can take from the presentations and that you found it useful.